HelixPath liked to call itself the future of artificial medicine. From the 17th floor, their glass tower looked like a mirror reflecting Lake Union. Beautiful, cold, and hollow. People said everything there was pure: filtered air, organic coffee, even their ethics seemed disinfected under ultraviolet light. But I knew what ran beneath that gleaming glass: layers of tangled data lines trembling with secrets that never made it into the logs. On the wall, their motto read, "Reinvent healthcare, one algorithm at a time." Listen long enough, and you'd realize it wasn't a promise, it was a warning. I'd been there 12 years. I'd watched HelixPath rise from an ambitious startup to a data empire, and me, Elena Marlowe, just the woman behind the screen, patching other people's dreams. They called me the woman of the back end, which really meant no one saw me until something was about to collapse. I'd blocked ransomware on Christmas Eve, restored patient systems using a backup so old it was stored on magnetic tape, and handled crises the company never dared to admit. My title wasn't fancy, but everyone here knew one thing: when the error light turned red, I was the one they called. Then Madison Crane arrived and turned everything into a performance. She came in like a gust of perfume-scented air, carrying a ring light and a handful of slogans about feminine leadership energy. They said Madison used to work in wellness branding before meeting Elliot Crane, HelixPath's CEO, at a healthcare tech conference in Napa. One yoga retreat later, she married him. A week after that, she was named head of strategic innovation. People said she was destined to lead the future. I just looked at her white heels, stepping into the server room, and thought that the future is about to slip. Her first meeting felt more like a live stream than a briefing. She brought a camera crew, switched on her ring light, and spoke in the cheerful tone of a talk show host. "We're not just innovating, we're raising our frequency of thought." The room erupted in applause. Not because they understood, because no one dared not to. I sat in the back row, watching the cold mist rise from the air vents and thinking, at least that fog was more honest than what I was hearing. Madison introduced something called Helix Cloud, a plan to migrate all patient data onto a new cloud platform designed by her team. It looked great on PowerPoint and was as dangerous as an untested drug. I asked, "Has it been HIPAA certified?" She tilted her head, her smile glowing like an LED screen. "Elena, we can't live in fear forever. Change always comes with risk." Risk, I thought. She had no idea what that word meant. The next day, I sent a 7-page report detailing every flaw that could expose thousands of patients' records. I CC'd the technical director. No one replied. A week later, my report disappeared from the shared folder, replaced by a white paper titled Healthcare Data Transformation, authored by Madison Crane. She had rewritten every warning into an opportunity for innovation. I printed the original, folded it in half, and locked it in my drawer. At HelixPath, silence wasn't weakness. It was a kind of armor. In her first month, Madison changed everything except what actually mattered. She canceled technical meetings and formed an innovation council made entirely of people who'd taken an online course called Data for Leaders. She preached about a positive mindset and a high-energy culture while the engineers stayed up all night fixing the bugs from her demo. I'd seen bad leadership before, but Madison was the first to make me believe PowerPoint could be a weapon of mass destruction. I started noticing her eyes on me during meetings. Not hate, not disdain, fear. Like my existence reminded her that beneath her polished surface was a hollow core. One night, I stayed late. The server room hummed quietly, the cooling fans spinning in rhythm. Rows of tiny lights flickered red and green like the heartbeat of some giant creature. People thought this system ran on electricity. It didn't. It ran on fear: fear of losing data, of being exposed, of being replaced. I made a full backup of the entire system, not because I planned to use it, but because instinct told me to be ready. In HelixPath, when things go wrong, someone always takes the fall, and this time, I knew it might be me. The next morning, Madison walked past my desk, her perfume flooding the air like a warning. She smiled. "Elena, I love your calm energy, but we need people who can keep up with the new pace." She placed her hand on my shoulder, light, almost tender, like the tap before the guillotine drops. I looked her straight in the eye and said slowly, Sometimes, speed is what kills your own system. She laughed and walked away, leaving behind the smell of expensive perfume and a silence longer than an empty log file. I didn't know when the countdown began, only that when the door closed behind her, it made a small sound, like the start of a system crash. It's strange. Even now, when I tell this story, I can still hear her footsteps fading down the office floor, heels clicking against the polished tiles like the ticking of a dying clock. Maybe you've heard that sound too, in your own workplace, when someone thinks they can erase you with a single email. I wonder where you're listening from. On your lunch break, maybe, or stuck in traffic somewhere? Tell me in the comments. I want to know where the other Elenas in this world are. If you like revenge that doesn't need shouting, just the quiet wait for a system to fail on its own, don't forget to subscribe. And if you've ever seen that moment when someone tries to delete you from their file with one careless click, stay tuned. Because this is only the first line of the code that brings the whole system down. 3 weeks after that meeting, Madison officially signed off on the HelixPath Alpha project, the program marketed as a breakthrough in AI-based genetic diagnostics. She did it in front of the cameras, the HelixPath logo glowing behind her, framed by the new slogan, "Data waits for no one." I stood in the back row, watching it all like someone watching a ship leave the dock, knowing it would sink. I had tried to stop it. In an internal email, I warned that the Helix Cloud platform hadn't yet passed HIPAA certification, that the data validation process was still unverified, and that connecting directly to external hospital networks was professional suicide. Madison never replied. She forwarded my message to Elliot with a note that said, "Elena still thinks the old way." On a Monday morning, I found a strange log in the system, thousands of unauthorized hits on patient test data. A segment of GenePath Alpha had been exposed on a public test server. I called Madison, keeping my voice steady. "We have an access control issue," I said. She answered, "Your issue is that you panicked too fast." That was when I knew no warning would matter anymore. That afternoon, the security team sent Madison a report confirming signs of a patient data leak in the test build. I saw the copy in the system log, then watched the status line change to deleted. Madison had erased it. She didn't forward it to the CEO, didn't call a meeting, didn't reply. She just erased it. Quietly, I saved the original report and the deletion log. I stored them in a hidden folder that only I could access. What I felt wasn't fear, it was familiarity. I'd seen people do this before, covering mistakes to protect their seat. Madison was just better dressed about it, or thought she was. 2 days later, she called a meeting with every engineer and manager in the division. She entered the room like a victor, smiling, confident, speaking in that crisp, polished tone. "We need to reevaluate how our technical team operates. It seems the old processes are slowing innovation." Every eye turned toward me. I knew the script. She went on, still smiling. "I have great respect for Elena's experience, but maybe it's time to let the new generation take the lead." That voice was sweet enough to make you forget whose throat it was cutting. I almost said something, but stopped. I looked around the room and saw familiar faces drop their gaze. No one spoke. At HelixPath, silence wasn't agreement. It was self-defense. I understood. I didn't blame them. When the meeting ended, Madison walked past me. "You know, Elena," she said, "innovation sometimes requires sacrificing what's familiar." I asked, "And what exactly are you planning to sacrifice, besides the truth?" She paused for a beat, then smiled. That night, I stayed late again. The light from my monitor spread across the desk, cold and blue like winter water. I reopened the logs, tracing every access event from the past week. Hundreds of undocumented actions, temporary permissions, holes in the system she thought were invisible. Madison had left traces. I backed up everything, encrypted it, and moved it to an external drive. Before leaving, I ran into Darren Wells, one of the QA engineers, standing in the hallway. He lowered his voice. "Elena, have you noticed anything off with the project data? I saw some lines changed in the test build, but no one's letting me review it." I looked at him and saw the fear in someone who still believed the truth could be heard if said the right way. "It's better if you don't tell anyone," I said. "Keep a copy if you can." He nodded and stepped back, asking nothing else. I left the building at 11 that night. Seattle rain fell steadily, streaking the windshield with silver lines. I thought of Madison, her confident smile, and the one thing I'd learned after 12 years. You don't have to destroy a system. You just stop fixing it. The next morning, an email from HR arrived. Quarterly performance review scheduled for next week. Please prepare your report. Under sender, it said Madison Crane. I smiled. When they start planning the trial, it means the verdict's already written. That afternoon, something felt off at HelixPath. The air was too still, like everyone already knew what was about to happen and was simply waiting for the cue. My screen blinked with a new notification. Quick HR sync, 4:30 p.m. No subject, no sender. I'd worked here long enough to know that meetings without reasons usually ended with someone being erased from the access list. I kept typing a few more lines of code, not rushing. When the clock hit the hour, I stood up, picked up my cold coffee, and left my desk. Down the hallway, a few coworkers avoided my eyes. Darren looked up from the QA desk, almost said something, then dropped his gaze. I nodded. No goodbye needed. The HR office sat at the end of the corridor. Frosted glass, white light reflecting on the floor like they were trying to turn the place into an operating room. Madison was already there. She sat perched on the edge of the desk, a green smoothie in hand, her smile as perfect as if this were a photo shoot for a magazine called Young Women in Leadership. Greg, the HR manager, sat beside her, face tense, eyes darting away like he was afraid to see his own reflection. Elena, thank you for coming, Madison said, her voice soft, as if she were about to hand me an award. We won't take much of your time. I set my coffee down. I figured as much. She opened a blue folder, reading with the kind of fluency that comes from rehearsal. According to our restructuring plan, we're making adjustments to better align with the company's new vision. Your current role falls under positions marked for renewal. I said nothing. Greg slid a white envelope across the table, like he was afraid it might burn him. This is the standard severance package. 3 months' pay and extended insurance. If you sign today, we can process it this week. Madison tilted her head, her smile thick as her lipstick. Elena, I know this is hard, but sometimes change is good, for everyone. I looked at her, no smile, no reaction. Do you know what you're doing? She blinked, briefly thrown off by how calm my voice was. I think I do. We need people ready to step into the future. Your future, I said, is built on systems you've never understood. She leaned slightly forward, eager to close the conversation. Elena, I appreciate your contributions, but this decision was made at a higher level, meaning your husband, I said quietly, just loud enough for Greg to hear and pretend he didn't. Madison froze, lips trembling, for half a second before regaining her polished calm. This conversation is over. I folded the folder and slipped it into my bag. No, not yet. You have 15 minutes, she frowned. Excuse me? I said. You have 15 minutes before things start to break apart. Greg looked up, uneasy. Elena, I'm not threatening anyone, I cut in. I'm stating a fact. You deleted a data breach alert 2 weeks ago. The Helix cloud system you launched isn't HIPAA certified, and last week you removed GenePath, Alpha's authentication layer yourself, to speed things up. Madison tried to stay composed, but her hand tightened around the glass. Elena, I'd be careful with what you're saying. I'm more careful than you think. I didn't destroy anything of yours. I just stopped fixing it. The air in the room froze. Greg looked between us like a man watching a slow-motion collision he couldn't walk away from. Madison took a breath, forcing a smile. Thank you, Elena. We'll make sure your exit process follows protocol. I unclipped my badge and set it gently on the table. You'd better hurry. 15 minutes go fast. Then I turned away. Before leaving the building, I opened my laptop one last time. No lines of code deleted. No systems were sabotaged. I had only revoked my own access. The silent scripts I'd written years ago, the ones they never understood but depended on to keep the system breathing. I closed the laptop. They wouldn't see the failure immediately, not yet, but when the routines I built stopped running, the system would realize it no longer had someone watching over it. At HelixPath, I never had to break anything. I just had to stop saving it. The door closed behind me. my heels echoing down the empty corridor. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew what would happen when something that once lived by my hands was finally left to breathe on its own. I stepped outside. Rain had started to fall. The coffee in my hand was cold, but the feeling in my chest wasn't. It wasn't anger or fear, just an absolute calm, like the silence that follows an explosion you've waited too long for. As I crossed the parking lot, I checked my phone one last time, opened the HR notification, and deleted it. A new message appeared from Darren. Elena, something's off with the system. The logs are going crazy. Did you? I locked the screen, slipped the phone into my pocket, and walked into the rain. The droplets hit my coat softly, like punctuation marks closing a chapter. And in my mind, the clock had stopped. All that was left was the echo of the moment before everything collapsed. 15 minutes after I walked out of HelixPath, the first screens began to flicker. According to Darren, the patient management system had been running normally when it suddenly stopped responding. One internal email bounced back, then another, then 10, then hundreds. The central dashboard shifted from green to yellow, then to red. The monitoring charts they'd once flaunted in presentations now looked like a matrix of errors. No one knew what was happening. They only knew everything had frozen at once. On the 17th floor, Madison was preparing for the quarterly innovation review. She was still in her white dress, hair perfectly curled, holding her green smoothie. When the screen behind her changed color, she frowned. Looks like another network glitch, she said calmly, turning to the tech engineer. Check it quickly. We don't want to interrupt the presentation. The young engineer tapped a few keys, then went pale. Helix Cloud isn't responding, Madison. GenePath Alpha is frozen too. I'm trying to reboot it. She forced a composed smile, glancing toward Elliot, the CEO, sitting at the head of the table. Probably just a small hiccup. Keep working. 10 minutes later, every internal system disconnected. The main screen flashed an alert. Access authentication failed. API gateways cascaded into errors. Servers threw 500 codes. From research to finance, everyone was locked out. The entire building seemed to hold its breath. Elliot shot up from his chair. What's going on? Madison spoke quickly. Probably an overload. I'll handle it. She opened her laptop and tried logging into the admin console. A single message appeared. Account not authorized. She tried again, changed passwords, even switched to the backup server. Nothing. She turned to Darren, standing at the corner of the room. Do you still have access? Darren looked down, hands trembling. No. Elena configured the master admin layer. When she left, she didn't transfer the permissions. Madison forced a laugh. She must have forgotten. Call her. Darren stayed silent. Madison slammed her phone onto the table. Ridiculous. One employee leaves and everything stops working. Elliot, do you see now why we need a new team? There was no proper handover, but Elliot didn't respond. He was staring at the error reports flashing across the screen. Customer data disrupted. 84% of transactions unprocessed. Sweat gathered on his forehead. Did you certify Helix Cloud? Madison blinked, lips trembling. Of course. With whom? With the dev team. They said it was fine. Which team? She went silent. A junior engineer spoke up softly. It was the outsourced group. They don't have medical certification. They used a test API. Elliot turned sharply, his voice thunderous. Are you telling me we've been running patient data through experimental code? Madison tried to smile. Just temporarily. I wanted to move faster. We're talking about medical data, Madison. His voice filled the room. No one breathed. The air thickened, the only sound the cooling fans humming from the backup servers. Madison turned back to the engineer. Restore the data, now. Can't, he said. The auto scripts are disabled. They need manual authentication, and only the person who wrote them can trigger it. And who's that? Elliot asked. Elena Marlowe. Madison's face drained of color. I heard it all through Darren's messages. Everything's crashing, he wrote. The CEO's yelling. Madison's blaming you. She says you set a trap. I read it, then turned off the screen. I was sitting in my usual cafe, an espresso still steaming in front of me. Through the window, I could see HelixPath's glass tower reflecting the afternoon light like a crystal about to crack. I didn't feel joy or sorrow, just a quiet stillness, like after finishing a long equation and realizing every answer lined up perfectly. My phone lit up again. Another message from Darren. Madison's losing control. Elliot left the meeting. The press is calling. They found evidence of a data leak. The security director's being questioned. I took another sip of coffee, the bitterness fading on my tongue. I once thought that when this day came, I'd feel vindicated, but I didn't. Only tired. Somewhere inside that building, Madison was probably barking orders at a team that no longer knew who to listen to. Elliot was calling the lawyers. And the system, their proud creation, was shutting itself down piece by piece, module by module, like a creature finally collapsing from exhaustion. I checked my watch. 2 in the afternoon, still early. What they'd call a technical incident was only beginning. Darren sent one last message. Madison asked if I had your number. I said no. I typed back, "Good. Don't say anything. Let the system learn its lesson." Then I set my phone down and looked toward the tower in the distance. Its windows were glowing like terrified eyes. The lines of code I'd written were finally going silent, as if they were allowed to rest after 12 long years of being forced to run. Inside me, it was just as quiet. No triumph, no revenge, only the calm of someone who knows that truth doesn't need help to surface. It just waits for time and for the right person to stop typing. 2 days after the system crash, HelixPath wasn't a company anymore. It was a crime scene. Patient data frozen, contracts suspended, stock down nearly 40% in a single morning. The media called it the biggest healthcare tech collapse in Seattle that year. I read the headline while sitting in a small cafe by the lake, steam rising from my espresso. Words like severe technical failure, medical data breach, and federal investigation filled the screen. But what made me smile wasn't the chaos. It was the small line at the bottom of the article. HelixPath spokesperson declined to comment. The spokesperson, Madison Crane. That morning, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Unknown numbers, law offices, reporters I'd never heard of, all wanting to hear my side of the story. I ignored them until one name appeared that I recognized: Nora, legal counsel for the Federal Medical Data Authority. Elena Marlowe? Her voice was calm, low, and professional. "We're investigating HelixPath. It appears you're the only person who still holds ownership over the scripts, keeping their systems operational, correct?" "Legally, yes," I said. "And practically, too. We'll need your cooperation. You'll receive a subpoena shortly." I hung up and sat still for a moment. I didn't feel fear. Maybe because I'd known this would happen from the moment I placed my ID badge on that desk. By afternoon, the press was circling. Madison appeared on a podcast titled Women Leading Through Crisis, her voice trembling just enough to sound human. "Sometimes you trust the wrong person," she said. "We were sabotaged from within." I listened to that clip in the cafe and almost laughed. Not because of the lie, but because of how neatly she packaged it. Sabotaged from within. The kind of phrase that trends easily. She still knew how to speak for an audience, not for the truth. But the truth didn't need her. It found its own way. Later that day, the Seattle Journal published a headline. Leaked emails reveal HelixPath leadership. Ignored security warnings. A screenshot followed showing the subject line, "Security Alert, Unauthorized Access in Gene Path Alpha." Sender, Security Department. Recipient, Madison Crane. System note, deleted within 3 minutes. I stared at the image, feeling something between pity and irony. She'd thought she could delete everything, never realizing that in the world of data, delete simply means move somewhere else, waiting for someone patient enough to find it. That night, I received an email from Nora. Subject: Meeting to confirm script ownership. She wrote briefly, "We need a copy of the 2019 NDA Appendix, section on source code ownership." I opened a drawer and pulled out an old envelope. The paper was yellowed at the corners, but Madison's signature was still clear. The next morning, I went to the Federal Investigation Office downtown. A plain conference room, pale fluorescent lights. Nora sat across from me, flanked by an investigator and a legal representative. Do you know HelixPath lost patient data during the GenePath Alpha pilot? Nora asked. I do, I said, and I know who deleted the alert. Do you have proof? I do. And the signature of the person who did it. I opened my laptop, plugged in the external drive, and displayed the original logs with timestamps, verification codes, and the recovered email. The room went silent for several seconds. Nora leaned forward, looked at the screen, then at me. You understand that with this evidence, Madison Crane could face federal charges for concealing a healthcare data violation? I don't care what happens to her, I said. I just want the truth stored where it belongs. The session lasted 3 hours. When I left the building, the sky was gray and the wind sharp against my face. I looked up at the digital billboards showing breaking news: HelixPath under federal investigation. That evening, I was back at my usual cafe with the same espresso. On the cafe TV, Madison was live again, smiling too tightly as the host asked, "Were you aware that the data leak originated from internal code failures?" "We're conducting an internal review," she said. "It appears to be the act of a former employee unwilling to embrace change." A waiter nearby let out a quiet laugh. I smiled too, the kind of smile with no bitterness left. A new email appeared in my inbox. From Nora. Subject: Witness summons schedule. She wrote, "You'll be called to testify next week to provide technical evidence. Be ready. They'll ask a lot." I closed my laptop. Outside, the rain had started again. This time, it didn't sound cold against the roof. It was steady, gentle, like the heartbeat of something coming back to life. I'd been silent long enough. Now it was time to let the numbers speak. The court date came sooner than I expected. The federal courtroom in downtown Seattle wasn't glamorous like in the movies. Dim yellow lights, hard wooden benches, and the faint smell of old paper. I sat in the witness row, hands gripping a folder marked with yellow tabs. Across the room, Madison Crane entered, stripped of her polished press conference charm. Her face was pale, hair pinned back in a careless knot. Elliot Crane, HelixPath's CEO, and her husband sat a few rows away, looking a decade older than he had a month ago. The prosecutor began, voice calm but sharp. "We'll now hear from the former lead systems engineer at HelixPath, the only person who truly understood how the platform worked." I stood, feeling dozens of eyes turned toward me. I didn't tremble. After 12 years, living in the shadows of a system, speaking the truth wasn't fear, it was released. The attorney questioned me about the system's operations, the automation scripts, and why I alone held access authority. I answered each question clearly, concisely, without embellishment. "Can you confirm that GenePath Alpha was not certified under HIPAA standards before deployment?" "Yes." "Did you warn company leadership about that?" "I did. I sent 3 reports, all ignored or deleted." "And who approved bypassing the compliance process?" I looked at Madison Crane. The courtroom went silent. She swallowed hard, eyes lowering. Her lawyer stood and objected, claiming I might have personal motives. I smiled faintly. I had expected that. "Mrs. Marlowe," he said when it was his turn to cross-examine, "it's true you were terminated from HelixPath, correct?" "Correct. Do you resent that decision?" "I resent the system she built, one that hides its mistakes behind slogans." A few people chuckled before the judge called for order. I kept my tone steady. He pressed on, hoping to corner me. "Did you perform any action that directly caused HelixPath's systems to fail?" "No," I said. "I simply stopped maintaining them. The scripts I wrote were my property under the 2019 NDA, signed by Madison Crane herself. I didn't destroy anything. I reclaimed what was mine." The courtroom fell silent again. The prosecution presented a copy of the contract. Under the fluorescent lights, Madison's signature shone like a seal of fate. When I stepped down from the stand, I saw her lower her head, fingers crumpling the paper. Elliot looked at her, not with anger, but with something else. Disappointment, maybe. The hearing ran until noon. During recess, Nora, the government attorney, sat beside me. "You did well," she said softly. I think they didn't expect you to stay that calm. I'm used to it, I said. 12 years working with systems that could blow up any time. You learn to breathe slowly. She smiled, a quiet note of respect in her eyes. You know, if you hadn't spoken today, this whole story would have been buried forever under the label of a technical malfunction. I didn't want revenge, said. I just didn't want my silence to be used as cover. By afternoon, the headlines were everywhere. Witness confirms Helix. Path covered up data breach. Madison Crane accused of negligence in healthcare system management. CEO Elliot Crane under investigation for internal misconduct. I went home in silence. The late sunlight poured through the window, painting the desk a soft amber. The external drive still sat there, quiet as memory. I opened it, scrolling through the thousands of familiar lines of code. Each one felt like an old breath. I didn't feel regret. I typed one line into my journal. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with a gavel. It arrives with a testimony said at the right time. Outside, Seattle was raining again. But this time the rain didn't sound heavy. It was soft, steady, a quiet rhythm washing the city clean, leaving the streets ready for something new to begin. A week after the trial, HelixPath officially declared temporary bankruptcy. Major outlets covered it with a tone that was equal parts outrage and satisfaction. The symbol of artificial medicine collapses under its own arrogance and neglect. Madison vanished from the media, and Elliot was suspended while the Securities Commission launched a separate investigation. I thought that would be the end of it. But one morning, a white envelope slipped through the crack of my door. No return address. Inside was a short letter, handwritten in blue ink. Elena, I need to see you. Just once. Not for me, but for him. M. I stared at the words for a long time. The handwriting trembled, nothing like the confident signature on that old contract. I folded the note and set it on the table. In my head, I could still hear Nora's warning, don't meet her. Anything she says can be used to redirect the case. But curiosity has its own gravity. That evening, I went to the small cafe on Pine Street where she had asked to meet. In the back corner, Madison sat waiting, a gray coat draped over her shoulders, her hair loose and disheveled. She was no longer the woman who once walked into conference rooms as if the stage belonged to her. Elena, she said, voice hoarse. Thank you for coming. I'm only here to listen, I replied, taking the seat across from her. She nodded, fingers turning the untouched coffee cup. I'm not here to defend myself, but there are things I don't know how to live with if I don't say them. I stayed silent, letting her speak. Elliot didn't want me to be chief strategy officer, she said. It was the board's idea. They thought putting the CEO's wife on the project would make fundraising easier. I just went along, but when he found out, he was furious. I wanted to prove I could handle it. So I pushed Helix Cloud forward to make him believe in me. Her voice shook on the word believe. You pushed it by deleting certification steps and security alerts? I asked. At the time, I thought that if I presented it well enough, it would be fine. I didn't understand that what I was touching wasn't numbers, it was lives. When he realized it, it was already too late. The data leaked, shareholders revolted, and I became the face of the fallout. She looked up at me. I know you hate me. You have every right to, but I need you to know. Elliot never told me to hide the breach. I did it because I was terrified of failing in front of him, and now he's being investigated alongside me. I studied her for a long moment. In the warm yellow light of the cafe, Madison didn't look like an enemy anymore, just a woman crushed by the weight of her own ambition. What do you want from me? I asked. Testify for him. Tell them he wasn't involved. I leaned back, exhaled. I'll say exactly what I know. Nothing more, nothing less. She nodded, her smile crooked. That's enough. We sat quietly for a few minutes. Outside, the rain had started again, steady and calm, like the city's breathing. As I stood to leave, she said softly, Elena, you once told me that speed can kill your own system. You were right, but sometimes it kills the one running it too. I stopped at the door but didn't turn around. I don't want you dead, I said. I just wanted you to understand. That night I couldn't sleep. Her voice echoed in my head, not the arrogant tone I remembered, but something else, the the sound of someone finally realizing the cost of her choices. Maybe she truly regretted it. Maybe she was just looking for a way out. Either way, I wasn't angry anymore. The next morning, Nora called. They're reopening the hearing, this time focusing on Elliot. They want you as the main witness. I stayed silent for a while, looking out the window. Morning fog covered the lake, the light soft and hazy. I'll be there, I said. After hanging up, I opened my laptop, scrolling through hundreds of old lines of code still sitting on the drive. Part of me wanted to erase it all, wipe the past, everything tied to HelixPath. But I stopped. Some things need to be kept. Not to cling to them, but to remember that sometimes saving the truth is its own form of repair. I closed the laptop and made a fresh cup of coffee. The smell filled the small kitchen. Outside, the sky was clearing, and I knew the next chapter was waiting, not for revenge, but for clarity. The second hearing took place in the conference room of the Business Ethics Commission. Not a courtroom, but the tension was the same. At the far end of the table, Elliot Crane sat upright, his face set in stone. Beside him was his private attorney, and across the table sat the team of federal investigators. I was invited as an independent technical witness. The title sounded cold, but the truth was simpler. I was the only person in that room who actually knew what had happened inside HelixPath's system. Madison wasn't there. She had signed a cooperation agreement with the authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. I suppose that was the only way she had left to keep herself from sinking completely. Elliot, on the other hand, chose silence, denying all responsibility and blaming everything on technical oversight. When I was called in, no one spoke, only the sound of pens scratching against paper and the quiet click of a recorder. Ms. Marlowe, the investigator said, "Can you describe Mr. Elliot Crane's role in the GenePath Alpha project? He approved the full budget, made all final decisions on progress, and signed off on the certification before Helix Cloud went live," I replied. "Do you have evidence of that?" "I do." I opened my folder and pulled out a printed copy of an archived email. At the bottom, his digital signature was clear: approved for release. EC. Elliot frowned, turning to his lawyer. He whispered something, but his voice trembled, no longer steady or commanding. The investigator continued. "Can you confirm that he was aware that the system had not passed security verification?" "I sent a report clearly stating that, addressed to both Elliot and Madison, through the internal system. They both received it and deleted it the same day." The room went silent. I watched Elliot exhale, a breath that sounded more like surrender than defense. His lawyer tried to recover. "That report could have been sent in error or misinterpreted. Perhaps a subordinate," I interrupted calmly. "I was the only one with the authority to create that type of report, and nothing in a medical data violation alert can be misinterpreted." No one said another word. The investigator nodded and ended the questioning. When I stepped away from the table, Elliot looked up at me, his eyes carrying something hard to name, somewhere between fatigue and belated understanding. The hearing lasted 3 hours. By the end, the commission's representative announced that the investigation would be referred to the federal prosecutor's office. Elliot said nothing. When he stood, I saw his shoulders tremble slightly before he left the room with his lawyer. Outside, the air was cold. The Seattle sky was pale gray, the wind rustling through the ginkgo trees outside the building. I stood still for a moment, watching the crowd rush past, thinking about everything that had just unfolded. There was no victory here, only consequences. But one thing was clear: silence was no longer an option. That afternoon, Nora called me. "Congratulations," she said, her tone lighter than I'd ever heard it. "The commission decided to indict them both. They want you to remain the primary witness when the case goes federal." "I thought it was over," I said. "Not quite. They need your help restoring the old system to trace the deleted data. We have to prove the full scope of the damage and where the chain of errors began." I paused. "You mean they want me to go back?" "Not to HelixPath," Nora said. "To the federal lab. You'll be working with their forensic team. They need someone who understands the system's architecture, and only you can decode what you wrote." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "All right, I'll do it." When night fell, I opened the external drive again. The blue glow from the screen reflected across my face. Lines of old code filled the display, each character a fragment of memory refusing to fade. I scrolled through a section of old notes and found one line I'd written 3 years earlier. If you're reading this, it means the system has been restarted, or it has died. I stopped and smiled faintly. I wasn't sure if it was exhaustion or the quiet relief of finally being able to look at what I'd built without resentment. Tomorrow I'd return to the place I once walked away from, not to save it, but to prove that what I built had meaning, and this time I wouldn't be working in the dark. I returned to HelixPath for the first time in almost 2 months. The front gate still bore the old logo, except the nameplate beneath it had been removed, leaving a smear of uneven paint. Inside, there were no hurried footsteps, no sterile white neon lights, only empty rooms, office chairs abandoned in the hallway, and black screens like eyes that had run out of life. A federal technician escorted me to the 17th floor, the former innovation wing. All that was left were tangled wires, sealed servers, and documents locked inside evidence bags. I sat at the control desk and plugged in my external drive. The startup sound was faint, but it made my heart tighten. "You're sure you still remember how it runs?" the forensic engineer asked. "Of course," I said. "I wrote it." I opened the admin console. The old system greeted me with a faded line of text. "Welcome back, EM." I entered the command and began restoring the data. On the screen, fragments of code flickered to life, like the breathing of something that had once been asleep. Nora and the legal team stood behind me, observing. I explained each section, the point where the errors began, where the data had been overwritten, and the log Madison deleted to hide the breach. It didn't feel tense anymore. It just felt like cleaning up an old house after a storm. 3 hours later, the full log was restored. I hit save, signed the verification sheet, and removed my drive. Nora stepped forward. "All done?" "All done," I said. "This system might die, but data doesn't. It only waits for someone willing to listen to the truth." She nodded, a rare smile crossing her face. "You just saved us a month of work." I stood, glancing around the room. Dust coated every surface, but the old slogan was still visible on the wall: "Reinvent healthcare, one algorithm at a time." I let out a quiet laugh, one without bitterness. "They did reinvent it," I said, "just through the hardest lesson possible." The next day, the news exploded. Elena Crane is charged with abuse of authority and concealment of medical data breaches. Madison Crane, cooperating with investigators, was sentenced to probation and banned from the healthcare tech industry. HelixPath dissolved, its projects transferred to a nonprofit focused on medical data security. I didn't watch the full coverage. I skimmed the headlines, then shut the screen. That was enough. I'd seen too many people turn justice into performance. I didn't need that kind of spotlight. A week later, Nora stopped by my apartment with a sealed envelope. "The commission wanted you to have the official closure documents for the HelixPath case," she said. "They also attached a proposal, an offer for you to consult with us on healthcare data security frameworks." I smiled. I thought I'd left that world behind. "Some people never really leave," she said. "They just come back in the right role." That night, I sat by the window, watching the city. It was raining again, as always in Seattle. But this time, it didn't feel heavy. I opened my laptop and created a new file. The first line appeared on the screen: Helix Recovery Protocol, Lesson Learned Edition. I typed slowly, writing each instruction, each note of caution, as if teaching a new generation how not to repeat the same mistakes. When the clock hit 11, I stopped, poured myself a small glass of wine. Outside, the lights reflected over Lake Union, shimmering like commas in a story still being written. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I wasn't the woman of the back end anymore, no longer the one fixing other people's mistakes. I was the witness, the writer, the reminder that some systems don't collapse because of faulty code, but because morality had been disconnected for too long. And as I typed the final line, "Pieces earned," I shut the laptop and leaned back in my chair. Outside, the rain softened. The city fell quiet, as if it, too, had finally understood the cost of truth.